Good morning, everyone. We're so happy that you could join us today. And I'm really thrilled to be just surrounded by amazing women leaders. So 2023 was a historic year in Minnesota. We got a lot done, and so now much of our work is in the implementation process right now. It's what I think about all day, every day, but with many laws that are taking effect on January 1st. And one of the many laws taking effect on January 1st is the Preventing Pay Discrimination Law, something that I'm particularly proud of and excited that Minnesota has adopted. Because in Minnesota, white women make 81 cents on the dollar. Asian women make 70 cents on the dollar. Black women make 61 cents on the dollar. Indigenous women make 61 cents on the dollar. And Latina women make 55 cents on the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. This is unacceptable, and it's real money. But in 2024, we are going to put an end to this discrimination. This new law, effective on January 1st, 2024, and enforced by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, prohibits employers from asking about or considering a job applicant's past or current pay during the hiring process. Because research shows that this is a big way in which employers get away with continuing this cycle of discrimination. And even as Lieutenant Governor, I have not been spared from this discrimination. One of the jobs that I applied for, my employer, my potential employer, asked me what I made at my current job. And I was uncomfortable answering, but I felt as though I had to in order to secure this position. What ended up happening is that I got the position and later on found out that I actually made $40,000 less than the person who was in that position before me. And this has consequences for our families. That's real wealth. And when we talk about this for women, and women of color in particular, it's no wonder that we see gaps in homeownership, gaps in overall health and well-being. This is where it starts, in wealth creation, in the ability for you to care for yourself, to care for your family, and then to set up your own future. We are consistently playing catch up, and this law will help us ensure that that does not continue in the state of Minnesota. When you're interviewing for a job or negotiating a salary, you should be judged on your skills, not on how you look. And finally, our state law will reflect exactly that. When women, especially women of color, get unfairly paid less than their white male counterparts, discrimination, sexism, and racism are perpetuated in other areas of life. Our current pay gap, as I've mentioned, our current pay gap prevents women from achieving their financial, educational, and personal goals. We can and must live in a state where men and women, no matter their race or ethnicity, have the same opportunities to succeed. And this is one way that we're going to try to make that goal a reality. And, I think some people, certainly trolls online, say, what's the big deal? So what? $40,000 a year? That's a big deal. So if you are not moved, your heart and soul is not moved, perhaps money or finances will be the thing that convince you. But we're going to do the right thing here in Minnesota, and I am so grateful to our legislators who got this done, and incredibly grateful for our Commissioner of Human Rights, who will help to implement and make sure that people know that they should not be discriminated against, and she will help to lead the charge. So with that, our Commissioner, Rebecca Lucero.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Lucero, and I'm the Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. Just real brief about our agency. The Minnesota Department of Human Rights is the state's civil rights enforcement agency. For more than 55 years, the amazing staff at MDHR show up every day to enforce the Minnesota Human Rights Act. It's one of the strongest civil rights laws in the country. At the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, we have a bold and clear vision: create a world where everyone could lead lives full of dignity and joy, free from discrimination. And that's what we're here to talk about today. A change to the law regarding when and how someone's pay history can be taken into account when determining pay. And I think when I talk about this, the first thing I always like to talk about is the fact that this is built into our systems. This is historical. You don't have to go back too far in history to remember ads that would advertise identical positions at the same company at the same time for both men and women with identical educational requirements, but it would pay two different rates, a higher rate for men and a lower rate for women. And you don't have to go too far back into history to remember that Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous men and women often did not even have access to these places. Black people could not even sit at the lunch counter, much less get paid an equal wage for work in those establishments. Those same establishments may have included a sign on the front reading, "No dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans. Japs, keep moving, this is a white man's neighborhood. Whites only, no Spanish, Mexicans, or Indians." In 1963, the Equal Pay Act was signed into law, making it unlawful to pay men and women different wages for the same work. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act passed with provisions specifically forbidding discrimination in hiring, in promoting, and firing somebody because of their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This means that before the Equal Pay Act and the Civil Rights Act were passed, paying women less than men, especially women of color and Indigenous women, was overt, pervasive, and legal. And while these practices and systems of discrimination have become more covert and more unlawful, this wage gap remains persistent and pervasive. Gloria Perez from the Women's Foundation is here and will talk more about specifics about what that data looks like today. And of course, there are a variety of factors that keep the gender and racial pay gap as the status quo. And that's why this law is so important. Everywhere that we can be proactive to prevent discrimination from occurring in the first place is better for all of us. And so even though the wage gap remains persistent and pervasive, I just don't believe that most employers, most businesses actively want to pay women less than men. I just don't think that's true. Yet, when you look at the data over and over again, this is what is happening. So this is intended to be a proactive systems fix to help remedy that problem, to align intention with impact here. So let's talk about the wonkier details of the law for those of you who love that part of it. Who does it apply to? It applies to all employers, public, private, nonprofit, all sizes, all employers in Minnesota. It applies to all job applicants, anyone applying for a job. This includes current employees seeking a promotion or a transfer within their same company. It also applies to full and part-time employees, seasonal employees, temp employees, all employees. So what are some things that employers can do? Because that's what I'm hearing questions about. Well, what can we do? So let me start there. To set pay, employers can rely on all sorts of factors that are really important. Skills, education, certifications, maybe specialty knowledge of different programs within the program, that is important for that employer. The job market, availability of people to even apply depending on where you are or the specialty nature of the position itself. What can employers do? They can provide information about wages, salary, benefits, etc. when they are posting information about the jobs. In fact, we highly encourage them to do this. This sets a transparent place for everyone to know what this position is about, both the responsibilities for it and what the range of pay is for it. Employers can also If an applicant voluntarily discloses pay history to negotiate a higher rate, an employer can use that information as part of the negotiation process. That's only an if an applicant voluntarily discloses pay history. So 2 things an employer cannot do. They cannot ask, encourage, or prompt an applicant about their current or past pay. Ask, encourage, or prompt, cannot. And they cannot consider an applicant's current or past pay when setting a rate. So what are 4 things that employers should do today to make this change? My first piece of advice, don't ask about pay history. Review your application. It's often on there. You might not even remember that it's on there. It's just kind of standard. Let's change that system. Review your interview questions. Look at all of the forms that you have on the entire continuum of hiring. For instance, your reference form might ask you to confirm with on a reference check somebody's salary. Remove that from your reference form. And then look at all the templates that you're using, and I hope you are, and we'll talk about that in a second, to set pay and to help you make decisions around pay. Look to make sure that it's not included there. Second, make an intentional decision. Set a clear policy on how you will make decisions. Again, we've talked about job market, applicant skills, education. Whatever you're going to use for your place of work, make that decision. Set a clear policy about it. Third, set up a system that makes it really easy for those decisions to be made the correct way, clearly, consistently, without violating the law. And that template that I've talked about is incredibly important, because if you have a template that lays out exactly how you're making decisions, you are making sure that you're making decisions to not violate the law and to not perpetuate gaps in pay. Lastly, communicate the change, especially to anyone who's responsible for hire. Communicate this change to all employees who are part of the hiring process. Over and over, we're hearing about people train HR folks about this. That is great. It needs to go beyond HR, because there's whole hiring managers and supervisors that are part of these decisions who might just not know that this law has changed without you communicating this change to them. So what can applicants do? They can voluntarily share their pay history. It's their history to share. They can voluntarily share it. They can use that pay history to negotiate for higher pay. And they can report potential violations to this law to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And so what happens if someone believes that there is a violation? That's a question we get asked a lot. Well, if somebody believes that there is a violation of the Minnesota Human Rights Act, they should always reach out and contact our office. You can log on to our website and complete a form, and someone from the investigative team will get in touch with you. Possible violations of this law will follow the exact same process as other possible violations of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. This includes an intake process, an opportunity for both parties to choose to engage in a mediation process, a neutral investigation to determine if there is a violation of the law, and if there is, the MHRA has multiple remedies available under the law. This includes civil penalties, compensatory damages, changes to policies, and requiring quality training around these new policies. Ultimately, though, my goal, and the reason why I'm happy to see all of you here, is that we are providing information on the front end so an employer prevents violations of the law from occurring and is actively working to help end the gender and racial pay gap. There are a bunch of resources on our website, technical support, forms, scenarios, fast facts, tips for employers that you can find to help with this. It's mn.gov/MDHR. So just in conclusion here, as with all of the best things in life, this took a tremendous amount of work to get here, and I would be remiss if I didn't take this quick opportunity to thank the team within MDHR who moved so much work forward, this work in particular for years. That includes Eric, Nico, Taylor, Kayla, Nock, and of course Irina, and many, many more. All of you make the tough days possible and the good days joyful. No bill is passed without the ferocious dedication of a brilliant chief author, and nobody was more passionate or dedicated to this bill than Representative Herr. For years, she was a dedicated champion for this important legislation, and I can't thank you enough for your work and collaboration with your colleagues to pass what was ultimately a hugely bipartisan bill. And to all the advocates and content experts, especially Professor Hasday, who went above and beyond, thank you for your support and your deep expertise. I started working on the Preventing Pay Discrimination Act soon after Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan appointed me into this position in 2019 with their support and their insistence that we will do meaningful work. It was at the top of my list of policy changes for three main reasons. It is proactive, it addresses systemic discriminatory outcomes, and it does so from an intersectional place. Everywhere that we can be proactive to prevent discrimination from occurring is a better place for all of us. Thank you so much. Gloria?
Thank you, Commissioner Lucero and Lieutenant Governor. I am Gloria Perez, President and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. For the last 40 years, we have invested $50 million in our state's women and girls, because we know that women are at the center of families and truly at the center of our communities. Every 2 years, the foundation publishes the status of women and girls in Minnesota, a collaborative research project with the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. We know that to improve the lives of all Minnesotans, we need strong policies that are grounded in data. We share research like the status report, and we also listen to communities about the realities that women, girls, and gender-expansive people face so that we can amplify their expertise to advance policies that make our state stronger. The wage gap between men and women has barely budged in over a decade. This law is one step that takes us closer to narrowing this gap that we know affects single women, Black and Indigenous people, and women of color the most. We know from talking with communities around the state that women, particularly young and older women, people with disabilities, and women of color are persistently underestimated and face barriers before they ever get a job interview. Employers and HR departments are on the front lines for changing the way we do business to value individuals for the expertise they hold in navigating against barriers. In our role as a community foundation, we stress that each of us has a role to play in creating the kind of state we all want to live in, where none of us is defined by our past or present obstacles, but by the potential we hold for creating a future that is better than our past. Minnesota is a national leader in women's workforce participation, and we are often the primary caretakers of our households. So when women have access to family-supporting pay and benefits, they can lead healthier and more prosperous lives. The data shows that regardless of education, women's earnings are far behind those of similarly educated men. And the wage gap, an effect of gender and race, as well as other biases, widens over the course of women's lives. This is where the pay history law will begin to make a difference. Of the policy recommendations we shared in our last report, banning employer inquiries into salary history is one step we can take in the long road to eroding pay disparities. Because the wage gap continues to hurt women's long-term earnings and potential for wealth creation, the Women's Foundation holds a policy agenda and is working to make stronger laws for women and families, like passing Paid Family and Medical Leave Act this year and this law, which will help us close the gaps that create unfair barriers for people who already face systemic barriers and biases that we have the power to fix. Women and girls in communities across Minnesota are the experts our state needs to shape real, lasting solutions. We look forward to sharing our next Status of Women and Girls report this February of 2024. We are grateful for the Department of Human Rights and Commissioner Lucero for taking this step, and to the legislature and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan for supporting policies that put women, children, and families first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Perfect. I want to just excuse me, point out briefly, Women Supporting Women, as Representative Her moved the sign so we can see the commissioner. Thank you for that. So I think we have compelling data, the report, the status report, as well as just the good work that the Department of Human Rights does every single day. And again, Professor, thank you for your good work on this as well. And Senator Westland and Representative Herr, we are so grateful for you. This is real. This pay gap is real. We see it, we feel it, and many of us live it every single day. So the solution is also real. So that is what we are, looking to educate folks about today, and just want folks to know, both employers, what is required of them, but also potential employees and employees as to what their rights are. Because if we are going to have an equitable state, a state where children and families can thrive in Minnesota, making sure that we are eliminating the gender wage gap is an important building block for that. So with that, we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Have you got any pushback from the business community at all during this process?
That's a great question. I might ask either our legislators or Commissioner. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So this was a real bipartisan bill, and so there was a lot of support from both business community legislators across the aisle. There were some really good questions about some of the language that we were able to work through with no problem at all. So I think for the most part, the business community has been really on board. You actually see a lot of businesses who have already gone this route and are interested in doing more. Like I said, many businesses are actively trying to be part of the solution here. They're trying to fix this problem as well, and we really appreciate their efforts.
Also, I was wondering, did the Department of Human Rights take this to the legislature to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, thank you. This is a governor and lieutenant governor bill that came from the Department of Human Rights and worked closely with, so this is an agency bill, yes. We worked closely with the legislature to get this passed.
Commissioner, just a point of clarification. You mentioned that if an employee wants to transfer or get promoted, that this would apply to. Would that mean their employer can't look at their current salary, or just that they can't ask about it in an interview process?
Both. So you can't ask about it, inquire about it. You also cannot consider it when you're making decisions around pay.
Anything else? Maybe Professor Hasday, can you speak to the potential impact this could have for people in Minnesota? What do you expect will happen as a result of this policy change?
They did a study, the researchers at Boston University School of Law did a study where they compared people in counties that were subject to a pay history ban and people in counties that were not subject to a ban, and it found that overall, employers were more likely to list salaries, which I think is good for everyone. And the pay gap shrunk by an average of 13% for African-American job seekers and 8% for women as a whole. So I see this as evidence that this helps workers as a whole while simultaneously shrinking both gender and racial pay gaps.
Commissioner, can you clarify the investigative process a little bit more? Because I feel like a lot of this could be even more covert and be like, well, we're paying you this because we think you're not skilled for a higher pay, and that's very subjective.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I actually really love talking about the investigative process that our agency does because it's really the center of a lot of the work that we do every single day. We actually have several investigators here. And so when it comes to this area of the law, this is well-developed law for how you investigate and evaluate the law. It's well-established law for decades at this point. And so to your point of like, how are you understanding what's really going on here? That is why it's so important to have a neutral fact finder who can do everything from review files and interview witnesses. And so you're right, you can have documents that say one thing, but maybe something else is going on. That's why that investigation can be really important to understand what's going on there. I'll point you to many of our investigations that we've completed and published and sent information out about where it demonstrates or where we show how we did that investigation, and at the end of the day found probable cause of discrimination, and then said, okay, what is going on here? Sometimes it's something like you're talking about, a little bit more nefarious. Oftentimes, it's people just didn't understand the policy, or sometimes there isn't even a policy at all. And so, is there a policy? Is there a training on it? If you have that template that I'm talking about and you're forcing your team and yourself to follow your template, you're setting everyone up for success. And so, no law will solve discrimination and bias if somebody is intent on being discriminatory. But we can set up systems proactively to prevent it from happening in the first place, and that's what this is designed to do.
Anything else?
Is there a desire for pay transparency at some point in the future to further build on this, to make sure that people know when they're applying, like what the range is, just to make sure that, you know, it's fairer maybe across the board?
I'll let you jump in here too. Let me just say this. I think what the professor said, from a just overall just management best practices, right, and hiring best practices, it makes sense to post a salary. I think it is, I think it's helpful, one, for job seekers to know, like, is this actually worth my time? Is this a good fit? But also I think at that moment is when employers really set the tone for what happens within their organization, what happens within their company. And I think to the professor's point, like, this is simply best practice. You know, I will let the legislators speak to if this is something that they are interested in pursuing additional measures here. But I do know we have data that is very clear about these gaps. And I think our administration, and clearly has energy about making things more equitable in Minnesota.
I'm Representative Kaliher, so I just want to share that I have had there is a bill that has been presented and given to me. I've worked on it for probably the last 6 months around pay transparency. I'm still thinking about whether I'm the best author to carry that bill, even if I've worked on it, but I do think that it is best practice so people know the range of the position that they are applying for. I just want to add really quick that I really just want to say thank you to the governor, lieutenant governor, and Commissioner Lucero, because this issue is something I've worked on. I worked in the private sector for 15 years, and I was actually doing my doctorate, my dissertation on the disparities that included pay. And so this is something that we've all really been thinking about. How do we really create structures and systems that help people not unwillingly knowing that they're upholding these systems, right? And so I just want to say thank you to them, and that though they are the ones with the leadership on this, this is something that our communities and those that have been marginalized or not been able to participate fully have been thinking for a really long time. So, but you know, the pay transparency, that is something that could yet still be coming, but there is a bill that is being worked on right now.
We have time for one more if there's one. Clearly Representative Herr was the right author for my dissertation for this bill. But I will just say this too, as I'm a co-chair of the Young Women's Initiative at the Women's Foundation, and one of the things that we do is we engage with young women and gender nonconforming people on a regular basis. We convene them, they are leaders, they help to shape the work that we do, and this policy is at the heart of all of that we are working to make sure that these young people don't have to experience what I probably am venturing to guess literally all of the people up here have experienced at some time. So I look forward to the next 10 years and seeing that data changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, y'all.